Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This week's show, we're talking about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Mob Psycho 100, Season 1, Episode 6. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. I thought because they set the whole thing up at the end of the last episode that Mob was going to catch a cold, I thought like he wasn't going to be involved in this episode, that it would mainly follow Ritsu, which it kind of does. It splits his time, but I thought Mob wouldn't really be involved in this episode, but no, it's he's fine and he's at school, and it's interesting. Like, he has this conversation with Regan, which I thought was interesting, where Mob talks about not wanting his powers, but Regan kind of, uses that same metaphor he had used previously with Mob about like a knife. He's like, yeah, a knife is fine as long as like you learn how to kind of control it, because Mob is like, yeah, like there's a point in time where like I lose control of my powers when I'm unconscious, and he's scared and worried about that. And it's so interesting because Regan kind of is very dismissive of it. But once again, I don't know if he's trying to do a Mr. Miyagi aspect of it, where it's kind of like, oh, you don't realize I actually am helping you. I seem indifferent. I seem like a total douchebag con man, which he is. But I wonder, is there actually some level, an element of his, like, what can seem like indifference sometimes? Or at least, his, like I brought up previously, it's like, how much of it is, I am actually trying to help you out, but I'm also taking advantage of you, versus, oh, I'm just purely taking advantage of you. So it constantly bounces back and forth. I mean, this episode might be one of the most egregious things that Regan's done, because he's doing a seance, and the guy's like, oh, like, can you be my father? And the guy's like, Regan's like, okay, I'm your father. And he's like, oh my god, how are you speaking Japanese? And he's like, oh, the connection just got lost. I was like, you were such a garbage person, Regan. And then it's like, oh, where's your dad from? And the guy's like, oh, my dad's from the US. He's from New Jersey. And it's like, oh, well, and then I love Regan trying to explain, hey, it's going to translate from English into Japanese when it's automatically going to do that, so you don't have to worry about it. He's like, no, it's okay, I can speak English too. And then Regan tried to say something in English, but it came out in Japanese. He's like, dude, that's still Japanese. So it's like, right, just tell me what you want. And he's like, well, I need that special move you did. And then Regan does this like move, and he's like, oh, it comes from, I don't know if that's some, I guess it's got to be some in-universe TV show or something. I don't know, not unless that's some mess he made up on the spot. I don't know. He was referencing what looked like it could have been like some kind of superhero TV show or movie thing that revolves like a cheeseburger or something. Like, the character seems like to be like, I don't know, it almost seemed like a superhero version, almost like a fast food superhero version of a mascot or something like that. I don't know. But basically, the guy's trying to find the combination to a safe, and his dad died with that information. It's like, that safe has a whole bunch of money in it. It could set me up for life. And I love that Regan hits him with like this spiraling hit, and it's kind of almost like a shoryuken, like how like it's this uppercut, and the whole thing of what the move is called, get a job, you bum. And once again, one of Regan's special techniques, where it's like, yeah, he spirals his fist and hits the person in the face. I love that. It's just like, we make these seem like special techniques. So far, we haven't seen Regan reuse the same technique. I guess technically we have to take that back, because he did use the salt twice. Granted, he went about it differently. He did like just spray the salt initially in episode 1, but in that same episode, he punched with the salt. So it's technically a different move, so. But as I said, a good chunk of this episode follows Ritsu as we kind of dive deeper into, like I said, Mob has his own complex, and so does Ritsu. Mob having no idea how much of a complex he's kind of giving his brother. It's still kind of his own thing, because his brother's like insecurities, because we saw that earlier memory in the beginning of the episode where Mob was using his powers, and he was telling his brother like, no, you'll have them too because you're my little brother. And that's just kind of there, and he's trying everything he can. He's wanted I love that you even see his hands out, like he's doing different hand motions and movements, and obviously the final one he does is like the Kamehameha. Has that been used outside? I said a Kamehameha, but like Kamehameha, like you get what I'm trying to say. I always flip back and forth on how I say that, but I'm like, I mean, because I would assume that's supposed to be a reference to that, but I'm like, maybe it's such a outside of DB that like I only associate it with DB, but I'm like, there's got to be other things that have utilized it too. Maybe not to the popular scale that is DB. I mean, like you don't get, that's DB's like so up there popularity wise. Either way, I'm going on these massive tangents and all that. Sorry, I figured that was like had to be like a reference to that because I saw the way his hands were cupped together like that, but. I thought this episode was going to go potentially, well, it kind of does. I thought the episode was going to go in a slightly different direction than it did, but I wanted to correct myself there because it kind of does still go in the direction I thought when Ritsu came across Tinga or, Onigawara is what I'm just going to try to, I'm probably just going to end up calling him by his last name because I kept forgetting his first name. It's like Tinga, but either way. Onigawara, like he was confronting Mob, not really confronting him. He was just like, "Oh, sorry about what happened to you. Obviously, don't want to explain the whole like, yeah, you kind of got kidnapped 2 episodes ago because of me, because of my own BS." Because he's trying to find the person who beat Teruki, because they want to, just like Teruki was like the shadow leader for the gang at Black Vinegar. They need one for Salt Middle School, and they want the person who beat Teru to be their person, but Musashi won't tell him who it is because he's like, well, we all got beat by him, but the guy that you're trying to recruit like wants to avoid doing anything with violence. So Musashi and them know where he stands. They probably know about the psychic powers and stuff like that, but it's probably a thing of, yeah, but like they're all like, hey, we're all about body improvement, and the fact is, like I said, they are ride or die for their club, and it's like, yo, we see the determination, and he doesn't want to fight, he's not violent, so I know like this kid wants to put in, he's actually trying, he wants to put in the work. They even like later on when he's running and he falls flat on his face and busts up his nose, he's like, no, I could keep going. They're like, look at you, your stamina is definitely improving. It's like I said, it's like a very feel-good group of people in the body improvement club. But either way, the reason why, before I went on that tangent, what I was bringing up was because Ritsu sees Onigawara acting like that towards his brother and acting all violent because he is the delinquent and stuff. I figured Ritsu would kind of misread that situation. It's like, oh, you're trying to mess with my brother, because the reason why he wants to make the school more peaceful is because he wants to put his brother in a situation where he never has to worry about using his powers, because he knows how much trauma is associated with his brother. So he wants his brother to have as much of a peaceful life as possible. But it's like, you're kind of taking that upon yourself. Mob never asked you to do that, but it's like, right, why should my brother have to ask me to do that? Because I guess some argument could be on a deep-seated, very pessimistic level. You could look at it as, well, you want it to be peaceful so your brother will stop having to even use his powers at all, because, it doesn't have to constantly be a reminder in front of your face. But that's why he wants to make the school more peaceful. So, like I said, I thought there was going to be a bigger issue initially of him going after Onigawara because he misread the situation, thought like Onigawara was trying to start stuff with his brother. But there's layers to it, because we get introduced to Shinji, who is the student council president. You're like, okay, what's this character's whole deal? Well, kind of like how Risu has some insecurity, so does Shinji. He feels inadequate because he's constantly told how inadequate he is to his brother. It's like, right, I'm the student council president, but my brother, he was good at this, he excelled at so much, and my brother constantly reminds me how terrible I am and how underperforming and underachieving I am and how he was so much better than me. It's like, yeah, his brother was also the student council president, but he also excelled at all these other things, and it makes Shinji seem inferior, especially when his brother's like, oh, don't you feel bad about embarrassing mom and dad and letting them down? And then we look in his room, and it looks like kind of a hoarder's room, where it seems like he has a whole bunch of trash stuff. So I don't know if that's a thing of kind of implying like when he gets home, he stays inside of his room. And so I don't know if that's what that's kind of implying. Like he wants to avoid being around his family so much that he just feels like he just kind of wallows in his self-pity. I don't know if that's because it looked like it was like bags filled with trash, but I could be mistaken. It didn't even look like he was laying on a bed or any cover or anything. It just laying on the bags that were covering his room. So I don't know. But because of that, he ends up convincing Risu to help him like blame Onigawara, because Risu suggested early in the episode, like, hey, like, let's kind of use the delinquents as kind of an example of making the school more peaceful. It's almost like Risu did not want to take, like, let's hit this with, like, an iron fist approach of, like, let's do something crazy. Shinji's the one that kind of suggested as much because he wants to overcompensate because he feels lesser than and inadequate. He's trying to overcompensate of, like, trying to, where he feels like he's lost control in his own life and feeling inadequate in his family. Here he can kind of power trip and enjoy that and kind of enjoy the power of, like, manipulating a situation, the whole Onigawara, which is so bad because it's like, yeah, he might be a violent dude, but he didn't deserve, like, them blackmailing him the way they did and kind of basically having him, like, treated like some kind of pervert. Like, oh, all the girls, like, recorders, he took off of the mouthpieces, and it's like, oh, you're probably going to do perverted stuff, like take them and lick them all over because that's going to be your way to indirectly kiss these girls or something like that. I'm like, wow. And the fact is, everyone immediately jumped on the bandwagon. It's that thing of his reputation precedes him because they already think the worst, and because, oh, he's a delinquent, so it's easy to frame him because it's like, well, they already look at him as a bad guy. What's one more leap in logic of, oh, he's a bad guy, he does all this stuff, so obviously he's got to be some pervert as well. So, and the fact is that Risu went along with it because what Shinji said rattled him because it was a whole comment on, oh, right, like, being like the words, the accolades that people put towards you, how much he didn't say this, but it's the whole point of the compliments people give you can kind of be a noose around your neck. Like, because for him it's like, oh, look at all this stuff, about all the stuff that his parents say, like, oh, look at how good Risu is, he's this, he does, he gets good grades, he's the best. And then even Mob being like, yeah, my brother, he's normal, he's not weird like me. Those words, all of that are more like a noose around his neck or a dagger in his heart, and it just cuts him deeper of just kind of like, I have to live up to these expectations people have of me. I couldn't just be me, because I don't think any of those expectations are put on Mob. They're just kind of like, well, Mob's Mob. Like, they don't, well, Shigeo is like that. So it's like, we don't have to worry about it. But it's like, I have to be held to that standard, and I would want to do, my brother wants to be me, and I want to be my brother so badly. And it's just neither one's, well, Shigeo kind of makes it clear who he wants to be more like Risu, but Risu does not make it clear that he's very, there's a deep-seated need and complex built within himself of wanting to be like Shigeo. Which is so sad because, like, you know, once again, going back to the Onigawara of it all, like, whereas, like, they're painting him in this negative light, he actually was trying to better himself. In fact, he actually rolled up with Musashi with the body improvement. I thought that would be his alibi. It's like, well, he was out running with them, so there's no way he could have done it, but the flute pieces, the recorder pieces were also in his bag, so the argument could be like, well, he didn't have to do it before he got here. He could have done it yesterday because he left his bag there and everything, but, like, Musashi would have been his alibi for, like, him, it being impossible for him to have done it the day of. But I mean, they did it in the evening when everyone had already left, so it could just as easily be like, oh, Onigawara did that. So in his own twisted way, like, Risu, I think it's an effed up way to go about it, but what, like I said, I'm trying to understand, like, beyond just, like, what Shinji said, like, what would motivate you to still go along with it? And it's like, well, in his own way, he's thinking, like, if I can make the school more peaceful by getting rid of someone violent, it sucks that we have to go to such extreme, because it's like, yeah, like, hey, let's falsify some evidence just to get rid of him because he's kind of a bad apple in our eyes, even though he is trying to improve himself and be better. Despite all that, which is so ironic considering Risu wanted to be so much like his brother, and it's like someone who wants to be different, someone who wants to improve themselves. Your brother wants to improve himself without his powers, and Onigawara is kind of trying to improve himself, and Risu wants to be more than what he is, so it's kind of ironic that you would kind of screw over someone who's not in the same boat as you, but kind of in that lane of I want to improve myself. So it is kind of, it's even more sucky that Risu kind of went along with all of this. I mean, maybe it's a situation because, like, obviously because there was also, he ran into the student council, the vice president of the student council, and he accuses Risu of being exactly like Mob. It's like, right, you're trying, like, don't be like your brother. Whereas, like, you're trying to pretend to be a minor character because everyone's assuming, like, right, if Mob has powers, you probably have them too, so you're trying to be as normal as possible. But it's like, no, Risu's just being himself, which to other people, they look at it as like, oh, like, that can be a compliment, but it could also be like the vice president saying that, like, he didn't realize like how much, because he is just assuming that Risu is doing the same thing as Mob, and it's like, you don't have to do that. But it's like, he isn't trying to do what Mob does or wants to do. That's just him normally, because he doesn't have any powers. So that just kind of, that's what actually pushed him to visit that, the Mitsura group. What's the leader, the dude's name? I think it's Kenji. I could be misremembering. But he's a guy that wants to help people with psychic abilities. And he mistook Risu for Shigeo. And he's like, oh, you must have psychic powers, and introduced him to the other people that are part of this program. There's the guy who has to put everything in to just bend a spoon slightly. There's the girl who's like right 62% of the time. There's the pyrokinetic who could barely keep a flame burning for like less than a second. And then there's the brothers who, you know, are able to telepathically like communicate. So obviously, being there, Risu didn't see any results, and he got even more frustrated because he was just drowning in regret about everything that happened at school with the Onigawara of it all. And he's just like, right, I don't have any psychic abilities and bounces. But when the guy who runs the group sees the spoon that he threw, it's like, right, it's all mangled up. So he does, in fact, have powers, as we see at the end of the episode, because he comes to their house and he sees Dimple is still alive, which is interesting because Regan was just saying like, oh, like there's a ghost that needs to be exorcised, and he's like, right, why don't you come along? And he's like, right, because, oh, you don't have any powers, wow, like, but you're Mob's brother, which is wanting to get sticking that knife in deeper and twisting it. But it's like, but I even love Risu calls him out being like, yo, what about you? Like, why don't have any spiritual powers either? Like, that ends up being that interesting thing of because earlier in the episode, Tomei, like, when she heard about Masato, like, interrogating Mob about last episode, she was like, yo, that was you, wasn't it? It wasn't like an alien thing. That was you last episode doing all that stuff at the schoolhouse. So it's like, right, that person, Teruki, must also be an Esper person as well. And so it's like, how many others are there? And he's like, well, so far in my life, I've only ever met that one person. And she wants to talk about it more, but he doesn't really want to talk about it, especially considering like, well, I kind of blacked out and I have trauma associated with me blacking out and harming people, so I really don't want to talk about it. But then Tomei's like listening into this, and she's like, whoa, was there another Esper person? She's like, oh my god, let's go out on a date and we'll go and find more Espers out there. She's like, because that will bring me that much closer to being able to connect and be able to communicate with aliens in space. So they go on their date to try and find like other Espers, but they did find one, but Shigeo tried to tell Tomei like, oh, I'm mistaken. I didn't see one. I thought I did, but I didn't, because he sensed an adult Esper, but he's like, it gave him such an odd feeling. So I'm like, I'm sure that's going to come back around, who that person is and what their whole deal is and why their situation made Mob feel so uneasy. Some very, very interesting circumstances. I'm excited to ultimately see where the next episode ends up taking us going forward with all of this. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.